Some stories begin quietly, on nights when the world seems too heavy and the rain falls a little harder than usual. This is the story of a single dad, an ordinary janitor, who stopped to help a Navy admiral stranded in a storm. He thought it was just an act of kindness. But days later, when a sudden knock echoed through his small apartment, everything in her life and his changed forever. If you love heartfelt healing stories about quiet heroes, second chances, and the power of simple kindness, we invite you to stay with us. And if you'd like more uplifting stories like this every week, feel free to subscribe to our channel. It truly helps us bring these moments of hope to you. Now, let's begin. The rain had been falling for hours, long, unbroken sheets of silver that swallowed the two-lane road outside the naval base. It was the kind of night that made even the most seasoned drivers slow down, lean forward, and squint through the trembling wiper blades. For Hayden Marshall, it was a night that felt strangely familiar. Rain had a way of quieting the world, of softening the noise inside a man's chest. And tonight, after a 10-hour shift, mopping hangar floors and clearing out utility rooms, no one thanked him. For Hayden welcomed the silence. His old red pickup rattled softly as he eased down the winding road toward home. The heater hummed weakly, unable to quite keep up with the damp cold. His shirt clung to him, sweat from the long shift, mixing with the residual chill from stepping in and out of the rain. But none of that mattered, not compared to the thought waiting for him in the small apartment across town. Chloe, 8 years old, missing her 2 front teeth, and bursting with questions about the world. Questions Hayden tried his best to answer, even when exhaustion tugged at him like lead weights. She had stayed up tonight, he knew it. She had told him before school that morning, "Daddy, when you get home, I want to show you the picture I drew. It's you, me, and Mommy in the clouds." Hayden had swallowed hard at that, the kind of swallow that carried grief down a man's throat and kept it buried just deep enough to survive another day. His wife Claire had passed 2 years earlier. Cancer. Fast. Ruthless. Hayden still felt the echo of that empty hospital room every time he opened Chloe's bedroom door to kiss her goodnight. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel, just a little further. Just get home. Then, through the flood of rain, something white flickered in his peripheral vision. At first, he thought it was a trick of the headlights, a road sign, a mailbox, a stray bag blown across the asphalt. But as he rolled closer, his chest tightened. A person. A woman. Walking directly on the painted center line, drenched to the bone, unsteady, like someone fighting both the weather and her own body. Hayden braked hard. The truck fishtailed a few inches before gripping the slick road. His heart hammered as he stared through the windshield. The woman wore a white navy dress uniform soaked through until the fabric clung to her form. Her shoulders slumped, her other hand pressed to her forehead as if bracing against pain or memories. A single suitcase dangled from her right hand, the corner scraping the asphalt with a dull metallic hiss. She looked utterly lost. As the truck idled beside her, she lifted her head. The headlights washed over her face, pale, strained, unmistakably exhausted. Her rank glinted faintly under the rain, Admiral. Hayden's pulse jumped. An admiral walking alone on a back road in a storm at night. Something was wrong. Badly wrong. He rolled down his window despite the spray of cold rain that immediately slapped his cheek. "Ma'am," he called out. "Are you all right?" She blinked slowly as though gathering her strength just to focus on him. Her voice cracked. She swallowed. "I'm fine. Thank you. I just need to get back to the base." "You're heading the wrong way," Hayden said gently. "The base is 3 miles behind you." She stared at him, confusion flickering in her eyes, the kind of confusion that didn't come from being lost, but from being overwhelmed. Another crash of thunder rattled the air. Hayden pushed open his door. He didn't think about rank, or protocol, or the fact that she might yell at him for stepping out of line. He only thought about her, this woman in white alone, in a storm, barely standing. "Ma'am, please," he said, voice steady, honest. "Let me give you a ride. It's not safe out here." She hesitated. Not out of pride, Hayden could see that. Something deeper held her back. A fracture in her composure. A weight she was trying and failing to carry alone. Her fingers trembled around the suitcase handle. Finally, in a voice so quiet, he almost missed it, she whispered, "I could use a moment out of the rain." Hayden nodded once, respectful, no pressure, then stepped forward and took her suitcase with the same care he used when tucking Chloe into bed. He opened the passenger door for her. She climbed in slowly, every movement, deliberate, as if her body were running on the last thread of discipline. When he slid back into the driver's seat, he turned up the heater. The cabin filled with soft warmth as she shivered, rainwater pooling at her feet. Only then did he see her face clearly. She was beautiful, yes, but in a tired human way. Not glamorous, not untouchable. A woman carrying the kind of burden that carved itself into the corners of her eyes. Hayden cleared his throat. "I'm Hayden," he said quietly. "Hayden Marshall." She hesitated again, as if deciding whether she could afford to be human right now. "Madison," she finally replied. "Admiral Madison Clare." Her gaze drifted toward the window, but not before Hayden caught the glimmer of something raw behind her composed exterior. Pain, shame, and something dangerously close to breaking. As the truck rumbled forward, Hayden stole a glance at her. Rain hammered the roof. Wipers squeaked rhythmically across the glass. In the silence between them, something settled gently in the air, something neither recognized yet. Two lives, both carrying storms of their own, had collided on a lonely road in the dark. And somewhere far ahead, though neither of them knew it, the first drop of hope was beginning to fall. The road stretched ahead in a dark ribbon, lit only by the soft glow of Hayden's headlights pushing through the storm. Inside the truck, the air was warm but fragile, like a sanctuary built from nothing more than kindness and a shared exhaustion neither of them had the strength to hide. Madison Clare sat rigidly at first, her back straight, her eyes fixed on the blurred landscape outside the window. The white of her uniform had soaked through, completely clinging to her arms and shoulders, her hair dripping onto the collar. She looked less like a decorated admiral and more like a woman desperately trying not to fall apart. Hayden didn't speak right away. He knew silence could be its own kind of comfort. But after a mile or so, he glanced over gently. "Long night?" he asked quietly. A humorless breath escaped her, something between a sigh and a broken laugh. You could say that. She didn't offer more, and Hayden didn't pry. He kept his eyes on the road, letting the steady hum of the truck fill the space between them. It was Madison who eventually broke the quiet. "I wasn't supposed to be walking," she murmured, her fingers twisting absently in her lap. "But sometimes life doesn't care about what's supposed to happen." Hayden nodded, not fully understanding, but knowing enough about loss to recognize that tone. "Well, you're safe now. That's what matters." Madison's gaze drifted toward the windshield. "Safe," she repeated softly, as if testing the weight of the word. "I'm not sure I remember what that feels like." Hayden didn't know how to respond to that, not yet. But something stirred in him, a quiet instinct to protect the same way he felt when Chloe had nightmares and crawled into his bed, whispering she missed Mommy. The storm softened just a little as they drove. Madison lifted a hand to her forehead, pressing her fingertips against the spot she had clutched earlier. "Are you hurt?" Hayden asked, concern slipping naturally into his voice. She shook her head. "Not physically, just overwhelmed." Another silence fell, but this one was different, less tense, more open. like a door that had been cracked just enough for a small light to pass through. After a long moment, Madison exhaled slowly. "Have you ever had a day," she said, "where everything you spent years building suddenly collapses in a matter of minutes?" Hayden considered her, really looked at her. "Yes," he answered softly. "I have." Madison's eyes flickered toward him. Something unspoken passed between them. Recognition, respect, maybe even a fragile understanding between two people who knew what it meant to lose more than they could bear. Hayden didn't offer details. He didn't need to. Madison continued first. "There was an incident," she said, her voice steadying slightly. "A report, a series of miscommunications, and the blame ended up on my desk. They suspended me this afternoon until an investigation is complete." She swallowed, the memory clearly sharp. "I've commanded carrier groups. I've faced crisis situations that pushed every limit I had. But nothing prepares you for the moment you realize people you trusted don't trust you back." The admission hung in the cabin like a trembling thread. Hayden's jaw tightened. He didn't know her story yet, but he recognized injustice when he heard it. "What happened wasn't your fault," he said simply. She huffed a small laugh. "You don't even know me." "No," he agreed. "But I know what someone looks like when they're carrying something that shouldn't be theirs." A beat passed, then another. Madison's shoulders softened just barely, like a rigid line easing under the weight of sincerity. "And what are you carrying, Mr. Marshall?" she asked quietly. Hayden kept his eyes on the road. "A daughter," he answered. "A promise. And grief." The word dropped heavy between them. Madison's expression changed, gentled. "I'm sorry," she said, the words genuine, unguarded. "Thank you," Hayden replied. For the first time since she stepped into the truck, Madison truly looked at him. Not at his clothes, or his rankless civilian badge clipped to his shirt, or the worn fabric on his sleeves. She looked at him. A man shaped by loss, but still choosing kindness in a world that had given him so little of it. The storm rumbled distantly. "How old is your daughter?" she asked softly. 8. "Chloe." His voice warmed. "She's probably waiting up. She made me promise to see her new drawing tonight." Madison's lips curved slightly, a tired, wistful smile. "Kids have a way of keeping us anchored to the good," she murmured. "Yeah," Hayden said, glancing at her. "They do." For a brief moment, Madison felt something crack open inside her chest, something she hadn't allowed space for in a long time. Vulnerability, humanity, the simple, unadorned truth that people like Hayden rarely held power, yet somehow held more character than many officers she had met in her long career. A sudden shiver ran through her. Hayden noticed instantly. "You're freezing," he said. "I've got a blanket behind the seat." "No, it's fine, Madison," he said firmly but gently. "You're soaked through. You'll get sick." She hesitated only a moment before nodding. He reached back, grabbed a folded flannel blanket and handed it to her. She wrapped it around herself slowly, almost reverently, as though accepting warmth was an unfamiliar act. "Thank you," she whispered. The sincerity of it made Hayden's chest ache more than it should have. They rode in silence for a few minutes, warm, companionable silence this time. Madison's breathing steadied. Her shoulders loosened. Her eyes softened from sharp vigilance into something closer to exhaustion, finally allowed to breathe. Then, quieter than before, she said, "I wasn't walking away from the base, you know. I was walking away from myself." Hayden didn't respond. He just listened, something very few people ever did for her. "I gave everything to the Navy," she continued. "Discipline, loyalty, every holiday, every relationship, every fragile piece of myself that I convinced I didn't need anymore." Her voice trembled, just slightly. "And now, for the first time in my life, I don't know who I am without the uniform. The windshield wipers swept across the glass. Hayden inhaled slowly. Maybe he said, "You're about to find out." Madison stared at him, really stared, like his words had touched a place she didn't know was starving. The storm outside began to weaken, the rain thinning into soft streaks like fading tears. Ahead of them, the lights of Hayden's apartment complex appeared through the mist. Neither of them knew it yet, but something quiet and life-changing had begun in that old red truck, a small shift in two weary hearts that had lived too long in their own storms. The rain had softened into a mist by the time Hayden pulled into the small parking lot behind his apartment building. The complex wasn't much 2 stories of aging brick, a few flickering stairway lights and balconies cluttered with bicycles and forgotten chairs, but tonight it felt like a harbor, a place where the storm outside couldn't reach. Madison gazed out the window at the modest building, her brow furrowing slightly. She had stayed in countless Navy quarters, from steel-walled cabins on aircraft carriers to spacious suites in Pentagon housing, but nothing about this place resembled the world she had lived in for decades. And yet, there was something about it, something grounding, honest. Hayden cut the engine and turned to her. "You're still freezing," he said gently. "Let me get you inside for a minute. You can warm up before I drive you back." Madison hesitated, not because she felt unsafe. There was nothing threatening about Hayden Marshall, but because accepting help felt foreign. Admirals didn't take shelter in strangers' apartments, didn't step into lives so different from their own. But she was exhausted, soaked to the bone, and more than anything tired of pretending she didn't need a moment to breathe. "Just for a few minutes," she said softly. Hayden nodded, then stepped out and grabbed her suitcase. Madison followed slowly, the flannel blanket wrapped around her shoulders like a fragile shield. Inside the stairwell, the air smelled faintly of pine cleaner and old carpet. Hayden's boots thudded softly on the steps, while Madison's wet shoes left small prints behind her. When they reached his door, Unit 2B, he paused, glancing at her with an apologetic half-smile. "It's small and messy." "Chloe's been on an art kick," Madison blinked. "Chloe, my daughter," he replied. "She's probably still awake." The mention of his daughter softened something in Hayden's face, a warmth that dimmed the lines of exhaustion around his eyes. Madison felt a tug in her chest she couldn't quite name. He pushed open the door. Warm light spilled out, and Madison stepped inside cautiously. The apartment was indeed small, but far from messy. There were crayons scattered on the coffee table, a half-finished drawing taped to the fridge, a pair of tiny pink sneakers by the door. The living room had mismatched furniture, a soft couch worn at the arms, and a bookshelf overflowing with fairy tales and repair manuals. It wasn't grand, it wasn't polished, but it was alive. More alive than any base quarters she had slept in for months. As Madison looked around, her eyes caught on a framed photograph on the wall, Hayden holding a little girl in his arms, both smiling in a burst of golden sunset. Madison took a slow breath. The image radiated warmth, family, and a tenderness that pierced straight through the armor she had spent years building. "Daddy," the soft voice floated from the hallway. A small figure appeared, barefoot. Hair tousled from sleep, wearing pajamas patterned with tiny stars. Chloe rubbed her eyes, then stared at Madison. The woman in the white uniform froze. Hayden crouched down slightly. "Hey, sweetheart, you're still up. I wanted to show you my drawing." Chloe blinked again, then tilted her head. "Who's she?" Hayden opened his mouth, but Madison stepped forward, gently lowering herself to the child's level. "I'm Madison," she said, offering a soft smile. "Your dad helped me tonight." Chloe's eyes widened. Are you a real captain?" Madison almost laughed, but the sound caught in her throat. She hadn't felt anything warm enough to spark laughter in months. "Well," she said, "I'm actually an admiral." Chloe's jaw dropped. Like the top boss on the ships, something like that. The little girl walked closer, studying Madison with a seriousness that only children could manage. Then she asked with absolute sincerity, "Are you a guardian angel or a ship angel?" Madison blinked hard. The question hit her like a soft, unexpected blow, gentle but devastating. She'd been called many things in her career. Commander, ma'am, authority figure, mentor, intimidating, unshakable, never an angel. A laugh, fragile and genuine, escaped Madison's lips. She shook her head softly. "I'm definitely not an angel." "But that's very sweet of you." Chloe grinned, then slipped her small hand into Madison's. Hayden's breath caught. He had seen his daughter warm up to teachers, neighbors, even strangers at the grocery store. But never like this. Never this instantly. Never with this quiet trust. "Come sit," Chloe chirped, leading Madison to the couch. "Daddy makes the best soup in the whole world." "I do not," Hayden protested, though he was already heading toward the kitchen. "It's just chicken noodle. It's magic," Chloe insisted. Madison sat on the couch, still wrapped in the blanket, her wet hair leaving dark patches on the fabric. Chloe sat beside her, curling up with the natural ease of a child who felt safe. And Madison, who had spent years living out of suitcases, briefing rooms, and steel corridors, suddenly felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the blanket. "This is a lovely home," she said quietly, as Hayden ladled soup into 2 bowls. Hayden shook his head. "It's just a little apartment." "No," Madison corrected, her eyes softening. "It's a home." He paused mid-motion. Something in her tone, gentle, almost wistful, struck him deeper than he expected. They ate together at the small table. Chloe chatted excitedly about her drawings, her school day, the rain, her missing teeth. Madison listened with an attentiveness that surprised even her. Each detail Chloe shared pulled something loose in Madison's chest, threads she hadn't realized had been knotted so tightly. After dinner, Chloe proudly showed her drawing 3 figures, holding hands under a sky full of clouds. "This is me," she said, pointing. "This is Daddy. And this is Mommy, watching from above." Madison felt her throat tighten. The artwork was simple, but full of love, every line drawn with earnest hope. Hayden's face softened as he studied it, grief flickering in his eyes but not overwhelming him. Just present, a part of him. "You're very talented," Madison told Chloe. The girl beamed. As the evening wore on, they talked slowly, quietly about small things that somehow felt big in their simplicity. Madison found herself opening up about parts of her life she rarely spoke of: long deployments, lonely holidays, the cost of duty. Hayden listened, truly listened, and Madison realized she had been starved for that. Hours passed unnoticed. At some point, Chloe fell asleep on Madison's arm, her tiny breaths soft against the Admiral's sleeve. Madison froze at first, unsure how to move, then relaxed into it, her heart aching with a strange, gentle tenderness. Hayden returned from the kitchen and stopped in the doorway. There she was, Admiral Madison Clare, formidable, disciplined alone for most of her adult life, now holding his sleeping daughter like she was something precious. Their eyes met. A quiet understanding settled in the room. Not love, not yet, but something rarer. 2 people both carrying old wounds, finding for the first time in a long time a place where the world finally felt soft again. The morning came too quickly. Pale sunlight crept through the thin curtains of Hayden's living room, washing the small apartment in a soft gold that contradicted the heaviness waiting just beyond the walls. Madison stirred first, blinking at the unfamiliar ceiling, momentarily unsure where she was. Then she felt the weight against her side. Chloe, still asleep, breath warm, and even her small hand resting gently atop Madison's wrist. A tenderness rippled through Madison that she hadn't felt in years, something protective, maternal, fragile. She eased herself up slowly so as not to wake the child. Hayden emerged from the hallway. Just then, hair-tousled shirt slightly wrinkled, a quiet look of surprise passing over his face when he saw Madison awake. "Morning," he said softly. "Morning," she replied, her voice still hoarse from last night's storm, both the one outside and the one inside her. He glanced at Chloe, then at Madison. She doesn't usually fall asleep on people she just met. Madison offered a gentle smile. "Kids, they see things we adults miss." Hayden didn't respond, but something flickered across his expression, a hint of gratitude, maybe even admiration. He brewed coffee while Madison stepped into the tiny bathroom to freshen up. She caught her reflection in the mirror, the faint shadows beneath her eyes, the remnants of exhaustion clinging to her face. Yet something was different, softer. When she returned, Hayden handed her a steaming mug. "You sure you're okay to head back now? I have to," she answered, straightening slightly. "They expect me at the base. Even suspended, there's paperwork." "Questions?" Hayden nodded. There was no judgment in his eyes, only understanding. Chloe eventually woke, rubbing her eyes, smiling sleepily when she saw Madison. "Are you still here?" the little girl asked, as if delighted by the possibility. "Just for a bit," Madison said warmly. "Your dad's giving me a ride." Chloe nodded satisfied, then hurried off to get dressed for school. As Madison watched her disappear, a thought crept in, unexpected, gentle, dangerous. If life had been different, could I have ever had this home? A child? Warmth instead of metal and orders. She shook the thought away. Reality was waiting. The ride to the base was quiet, but not uncomfortable. Madison sat straighter now, the weight of her uniform still damp, reminding her of who she was expected to be once she stepped through the gates. Hayden pulled up near the administrative building. Military personnel walked briskly under the morning sun, saluting higher-ranking officers, exchanging clipped greetings. Madison unbuckled slowly. "Thank you," she said, meeting his eyes. "For last night. For everything." "You don't need to thank me," Hayden replied. "Anyone would have stopped." "No," she said gently. "Not anyone." He hesitated, then gave a small nod. Madison began to step out but paused. "And Hayden." She swallowed, unsure why the words mattered so much. "I hope today is easier for you." He managed a faint smile. "We'll see." But as she headed toward the main entrance, something inside her tightened a sense of unease, the kind that precedes a storm. Hayden reached the janitorial building 5 minutes later, already feeling the tug of time pressing on him. He wasn't normally late. He prided himself on his reliability. His steadiness was what kept him grounded after losing Claire routine discipline being there for Chloe. But today had started differently, and when he stepped inside, the consequences were waiting. Calvin Brooks, broad-shouldered overconfident with the perpetual smirk of a man who mistook authority for superiority, stood near the supply desk, clipboard in hand. He looked up as Hayden entered. "Well, well," Calvin drawled. "Look who finally decided to show up." Hayden exhaled slowly. "Morning." "Sorry, I'm a little late." "It's not a little," Calvin snapped. "You're 12 minutes past shift start. 12 Marshall. Do you know what that means?" Hayden resisted the urge to clench his fists. "My daughter wasn't feeling well this morning. I had to make sure she excuses." Calvin cut in sharply. "That's all you janitor types ever have." The room grew still. 2 younger workers nearby pretended to keep cleaning but were clearly listening. Hayden straightened. "I'm not making excuses. Just explaining." "Oh, explaining," Calvin said mockingly. "Well, let me explain something to you. This is a military base, not some daycare. We run on discipline, reliability, and frankly, Marshall, you lack both." Hayden's jaw tightened. "Sir, I've never been late a single day since I started here." And yet Calvin said with a shrug, "Here we are." He stepped closer, lowering his voice but not his cruelty. "You're a janitor, Marshal. A replaceable one. Don't forget that." Something inside Hayden shifted, something wounded, but not broken. He wasn't a man who snapped easily, but humiliation, when delivered in front of others, had a way of slicing deeper. "I said I'm sorry," Hayden replied calmly. "It won't happen again." "No," Calvin said coldly. "It won't." He took a step back, crossed his arms, and spoke loudly enough for everyone in the building to hear. "Because you're fired." The words struck Hayden like a blow. The two workers froze mid-motion. One of them dropped a rag. Hayden blinked, slowly. "Fired over 12 minutes over your attitude, your lack of respect. And frankly, I don't like the way you look at me like you think you're better than you are." "I don't." "Save it," Calvin spat. "Pack your things. Turn in your badge. You're done." Hayden felt heat rush to his face, not anger, but shame. He wasn't ashamed of who he was, but of being diminished like this, stripped of dignity in front of others. It hit hard. "My daughter," he began. "Not my problem," Calvin barked. "Get out." Hayden swallowed. Hard. He turned slowly, fighting the urge to say something, anything that might salvage the last thread of his pride. But every instinct told him that arguing would only make things worse. As he stepped toward the door, his vision blurred, not from tears, but from the rush of helplessness. 12 minutes. A sick child. A broken-down truck. A life that already felt too heavy. And still this. When he reached the hallway, he paused, steadying himself. He didn't notice the figure standing near the corner at first, but she noticed him. Madison. She had seen everything. Her eyes no longer tired, but sharp with anger, tracked Calvin Brooks like a hawk locking onto prey. Hayden opened his mouth, embarrassed, wanting to disappear. "You didn't have to." But Madison lifted a hand. Her voice, low-controlled, dangerous. "Hayden," she said. "Go home. Take care of Chloe." He hesitated. "This isn't right," she added, "and I'm not letting it stand." The morning sunlight caught the Admiral's rank on her uniform, but in her expression there was something deeper than authority. There was justice. The administrative wing of the naval base had always felt cold, but this morning the chill seemed deeper, sharper, as Admiral Madison Clare walked through its sterile corridors. The faint buzz of fluorescent lights echoed overhead, and every footstep she took reverberated with a tension she couldn't quite swallow down. She had slept only a few hours, and yet the exhaustion she carried wasn't physical. It was the weight of yesterday's humiliation, the sting of betrayal from officers she had mentored for years, and now, the image of Hayden Marshall being stripped of his dignity in front of co-workers who pretended not to see. His face, calm but wounded, had imprinted itself in her mind. 12 minutes late. Fired without thought. A good man dismissed by a petty one. Madison wasn't someone who rushed to anger, but injustice. That ignited something in her. When she entered the Internal Affairs office, Harold Jensen Stern, composed, and known for his relentless integrity, stood near a wall of filing cabinets. He looked up, surprised. "Admiral Clare," he greeted, straightening instinctively. "I wasn't expecting you until later this afternoon." "I came early," she replied. "I'd like to review the documents again." Jensen studied her quietly for a moment. His gray eyes were perceptive, the kind that noticed what others missed. "You're different today," he remarked. "More focused." Madison lifted her chin. Yesterday was enlightening. Jensen motioned her toward a stack of folders on the table. "The accusations against you stem from Lieutenant Randall's report, and as we discussed, he claims you authorized a supply reroute without proper clearance." She exhaled slowly. "Which I didn't. So you maintain." Madison fixed him with a level look. I don't maintain. I state facts. Jensen held up his hands in surrender. Fair enough. He watched her as she sifted through documents, calm, methodical, but with an undercurrent of urgency he hadn't seen before. Admiral, he said after a moment. Something happened this morning, didn't it? Madison stopped flipping the pages. What makes you say that I've worked investigations for 20 years? Jensen said. I know the look of someone who has had enough. Madison hesitated. She wasn't accustomed to sharing personal thoughts. Her career had been built on composure distance and keeping her vulnerabilities walled away behind medals and protocol. But something inside her cracked open another echo of last night's warmth in Hayden's apartment. Chloe's innocent smile, the simplicity of kindness offered with no agenda, and then Calvin's cruelty. She closed the folder slowly. This isn't just about me anymore, she said quietly. Jensen raised an eyebrow. Explain. Madison inhaled, gathering her thoughts. This morning I witnessed Calvin Brooks, the temporary facilities manager, publicly berate and fire a janitor. 12 minutes late. That's all. A man who has worked here faithfully for years. Brooks Jensen frowned. He's only been in that position for 2 months. Yes, Madison said sharply. And he's been abusing it. Jensen crossed his arms. You're sure what you saw wasn't taken out of context? She shot him a look sharp enough to slice steel. I know abuse of authority when I see it. Jensen nodded slowly. Tell me more. His name is Hayden Marshall. She began, her tone steady but edged with simmering anger. He's a single father, 2 years widowed. Good man, quiet, hard-working. And Brooks humiliated him in front of others, dismissed him like trash. Because he could. Jensen absorbed this. And you believe it's connected. I believe Brooks is the kind of man who pushes boundaries until someone stops him. Jensen tapped his fingers against the table. Funny you say that. I received an anonymous note last week about discrepancies in his department. Missing supplies, conflicting timesheets. Small things, but patterns matter. Madison's pulse quickened. Why didn't you tell me this yesterday? I wasn't sure it was credible. Jensen's eyes hardened. Now I'm reconsidering. For the first time since entering the room, Madison felt a spark, something she hadn't felt since the day her suspension hit her desk, like a hammer. Hope. Not the soft kind she felt in Hayden's apartment. This was sharper, purposeful, a reason to fight. Jensen, she said firmly. I want every file on Brooks's department for the last 6 months. He blinked. That's a lot of paperwork. Then we'd better start. Hours slipped by as the two of them combed through documents. Madison's military training lent her an almost surgical focus. She scanned rows of numbers, dates, signatures, and footnotes with a precision that surprised even Jensen. The deeper they went, the darker the picture became. Invoices approved on days Brooks wasn't on shift, maintenance expenses without receipts, altered time logs, and most damning of all, a string of reports where responsibility for small mishaps had been pinned on lower-level employees, many of whom had spotless records until Brooks arrived. Madison clenched her jaw. This man has been covering himself for months, she muttered. Jensen nodded grimly, and pushing blame downward to stay clean. Madison closed a file with more force than necessary. Hayden wasn't his first victim. No, Jensen agreed. But he may be the last. For a moment, Madison rested her hands on the table. She wasn't thinking about her rank, or her reputation, or the suspension that had shaken her entire identity. She was thinking about Hayden, how he stood straight even when facing humiliation, how he tried to protect his daughter even as life pushed him down, how he had helped her, a stranger, without hesitation. No one like that deserved betrayal from the people above them. I'm reopening my case, she said quietly. Jensen blinked. Yours? Yes. And Brooks, she exhaled softly. I have a feeling they intersect. Jensen hesitated. Admiral, if you're wrong, I'm not, she cut in. And even if I were, I can't sit still while good people are being crushed under bad leadership. She gathered the documents, straightening them with steady hands. When do you want to start the interviews? Jensen asked. Today. And Hayden Marshall? He asked carefully. Madison paused in the doorway. Her expression softened just a fraction. I'll speak to him myself. Then, with the confidence of a woman rediscovering her true rank, not the one sewn on her collar, but the one forged in her character, Admiral Madison. Claire stepped out of the office, a storm of purpose gathering behind her eyes. Something had shifted, not just in the investigation, but in her. The woman who had walked alone in the rain last night was gone. In her place stood someone ready to fight. Not for medals, not for recognition, but for justice, for truth, and quietly, unexpectedly, for a single-dad janitor who had shown her more humanity in one evening than the Navy had shown her in months. The afternoon light in Hayden's apartment felt thin, like a veil pulled over a world he no longer recognized. The small place usually carried a warmth, a sense of gentle clutter that made it feel lived in. But today, everything felt muted, dimmer, as if the walls themselves sensed his disappointment. Hayden stood at the kitchen counter staring at the stack of folded uniforms he had brought home after turning in his badge. He had placed them neatly, almost too neatly, as if order could soften the blow of what had happened. 12 minutes. 12 minutes had cost him the job that kept food on the table and his daughter's world stable. He rubbed his forehead with tired fingers. There was no anger in him, just a heavy numbness. The weight of responsibility pressed against his ribs. Chloe needed him. The apartment needed rent. Life didn't stop because one man lost his job. Daddy, her small voice pulled him from his thoughts. Chloe stood in the doorway holding the picture she had shown Madison last night. Her hair was slightly tousled from her afternoon nap. Her eyes carried the natural worry of a child who sensed trouble before anyone explained it. Did something bad happen? She asked softly. Hayden forced a smile. No, sweetheart. Just a grown-up kind of day. Did you get in trouble at work? He paused. Children were mirrors. They reflected what they saw, even if they didn't understand the frame. Something like that, he admitted. But it's going to be okay. I promise. Chloe stepped closer and wrapped her arms around him. Her tiny hug broke something inside him, something hard and lonely, but he held her, gently refusing to let his worry spill onto her small shoulders. I love you, Daddy, she whispered. I love you too, he murmured, pressing a kiss to her hair. They stayed like that for a long moment. Then, knock. A sudden sharp knock sliced through the room. Hayden straightened, instinctively pulling Chloe behind him. It wasn't a neighborly knock. It wasn't tentative or polite. It was firm, deliberate, more like a command than a request. Knock. 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 Chloe's eyes widened. Daddy, who is it? I don't know. Hayden's mind raced. Rent wasn't due. He hadn't told anyone about this morning. The base wouldn't send someone to his home over a termination. And yet, the knock came again. 3 heavy strikes that vibrated through the wooden door. Hayden exhaled, steadying himself, then approached. When he opened the door, the hallway light poured in. And there she was. Admiral Madison Clare. Not the exhausted, stumbling woman from last night. Not the quiet, vulnerable presence who had warmed herself in his living room. This Madison stood with a posture like carved steel rain jacket over her uniform wet hair, clinging to her shoulders, from a drizzle, outside her expression sharp and alive with purpose. She held a folder under one arm, several actually, and a tablet. Her eyes met his steady, fierce, unyielding. Hayden, she said, breath slightly visible in the cool air of the hallway. He blinked. "Admiral, what are you? I need to come in." Her tone wasn't rigid, but it carried urgency. Not rank. Purpose. Hayden stepped aside. Chloe peeked from behind the couch. Miss Madison saw her and offered a gentle nod, one that instantly softened her entire demeanor. "Hi, sweetheart." Chloe smiled shyly, then retreated to her room, familiar enough with adult tension to give space. When the door to Chloe's room closed, Madison's expression shifted. Hard edges returning. "I owe you the truth," she said. Hayden frowned. About what Madison placed the folders on the small kitchen table and opened the first one. Inside were printed reports, signatures, timestamps, inconsistencies circled in red. "This," she said, tapping the papers, "is proof that Calvin Brooks has been manipulating reports, altering logs, and falsifying documentation for months." Hayden's breath caught. What she opened another file. "These are camera recordings. You were targeted, Hayden. Brooks used your 12-minute delay as an excuse to flex authority he never should have had." Hayden stared at the images, at the discrepancies, at the timestamps that didn't match. "He fired me in front of everyone," he said, quietly. "Like I was nothing." Madison's voice cracked, not with weakness, but with controlled fury. "You're not nothing." He looked at her, surprised by the intensity in her tone. Madison stepped closer, her eyes unwavering. "I'm not here as an admiral. I'm here as someone who saw a good man get broken by a corrupt one." Hayden swallowed. Why are you doing this?" She paused. "Why?" Was it because Hayden had helped her when she was lost in the rain, because he had shown her humanity when she was drowning in humiliation, because his kindness had been the first real warmth she had felt in months? Or was it because she recognized something of herself? In him, a person quietly carrying more than anyone knew. Because she said, "Finally, I know what it feels like to be blamed for something you didn't do." The room fell silent. Madison looked at him, really looked, her voice softer now. "Hayden, you helped me last night without hesitation. You saw me, not my rank, not my uniform, just me. It's my turn to help you." He didn't know what to say. Gratitude tangled with disbelief. She continued, her voice steady. "Tomorrow morning I'm presenting all of this to Internal Affairs. Jensen is on board. And when this is over, Brooks will answer for every abuse of power." Hayden rubbed the back of his neck, overwhelmed. "You didn't have to do this." "Yes," Madison said quietly. "I did." Their eyes locked, an understanding forming between them, something fragile and yet strong enough to shift the air in the room. As Madison gathered the papers, Chloe opened her bedroom door just enough to peep out. "Miss Madison? Are you staying for dinner again?" Madison blinked, caught off guard by the innocence in the invitation. Hayden's cheeks warmed. "Chloe, Madison has work to do." Madison knelt down so she was eye level with the little girl. "Sweetheart, I can't tonight, but thank you." Chloe nodded solemnly, as if accepting an official military denial. Madison stood and headed to the door, but before she left, she turned back to Hayden. "Be ready," she said. "Tomorrow will be a long day, but I promise you this justice is coming." Hayden swallowed hard. "I thank you, Madison." She held his gaze for just a heartbeat longer, long enough for gratitude, respect, and something warmer to pass between them. Then she stepped into the hallway. The door closed softly behind her. Hayden exhaled, feeling the faint trembling of a man who had been thrown into darkness and suddenly shone a flicker of light. Justice was coming. And so it seemed, was something neither of them had expected. Something gentle. Something steady. Something that began with a knock in the rain. The sun had barely risen when Admiral Madison Clare stepped onto the base the next morning, her uniform crisp, her stride steady, her eyes sharper than they had been in months. Something inside her had awakened, purpose conviction, a fire that came not from rank or duty, but from a deeper place, a place where justice mattered more than reputation. Internal Affairs was already busy when she arrived. Officers moved between offices, carrying binders, tablets, and reports. But the moment Madison entered the room seemed to shift. Straightened backs, lowered conversations, uncertain glances. Even suspended, she carried an aura that demanded respect. Harold Jensen approached her with 2 cups of coffee, one black one with a single cream. "Thought you might need this," he said. Madison accepted the cup with a nod of gratitude. "Thank you. Has Brooks arrived?" "He's here," Jensen replied. "I had him come in early. Told him we needed to review monthly expense logs. That'll keep him seated long enough," Madison said, setting her folder on the main table. "And the others, 3 technicians, 2 civilians. All willing to talk now that they know you're looking into things." A flicker of anger passed over her expression. He intimidated them. "Bullies often do," Jensen said. "But they're ready." Madison exhaled. "Good. Let's bring in the first witness." The interviews began slowly, each person entering with caution etched into their posture. Most had been afraid to speak up before worried their jobs, or worse, their records would take a hit. But under Madison's steady gaze and Jensen's quiet reassurance, they opened up. A young technician named Alvarez fidgeted with his sleeves as he spoke. "Brooks. He changed my report last month. Said I misdiagnosed a coolant issue. But I didn't. He signed my name on the new report." "Without your consent?" Madison asked. "Ma'am, I would never sign off on something I didn't do. I swear." Madison nodded. "Your integrity isn't what's in question." "His is." They brought in another civilian, an older man named Patterson, who had worked on base maintenance longer than Brooks had been in the Navy itself. "He blamed me for that chemical spill last month," Patterson said. "Said I didn't secure the storage doors, but I checked them twice. He was the last one in that room, Admiral. I saw him." Madison's jaw tightened. "Did you file a statement?" "No, ma'am. He made sure I knew what would happen if I did." Fear. Silence. Manipulation. Madison felt each testimony like a weight pressing into her ribs. But behind the heaviness, something fierce grew determination. Then a young woman entered, nervous, twisting her ID badge between her fingers. "I used to work the same shift as Hayden," she whispered. "He covered for people all the time. When someone's kid got sick, when someone's bus ran late, when someone needed an extra hour to get home. He never complained. Brooks hated that. Hated what Madison asked gently. That Hayden made him look unnecessary. Hayden solved problems before Brooks even noticed them." Jensen murmured, "Competence is threatening to insecure men." Madison nodded once. "Thank you. This helps more than you know." As the young woman left, Madison felt a mix of anger and admiration swirl through her. Hayden's kindness had been his downfall, at least in Brooks's eyes, but not in hers. Not anymore. By late morning, the pile of evidence had grown thick, conflicting reports, altered logs, false signature statements from multiple witnesses, and discrepancies no audit could ignore. Jensen leaned over the table, studying the assembled files. "We've got enough to open a full investigation." Madison closed one folder, her movements slow and controlled. "We're not done yet." Jensen raised an eyebrow. "What more do you need, Hayden Marshall?" Jensen nodded. "He's waiting in the hall." Madison inhaled deeply. This would be different. Hayden wasn't just a witness, not just a victim. He had become something else, a quiet anchor she hadn't expected to lean on. When he stepped into the room, he looked both out of place and completely steady. His clothes were simple, his boots worn, his shoulders broad, but slightly tense, as if bracing for bad news. Yet when his eyes met Madison's, something softened in both of them. Hayden, she greeted with a warmth she didn't extend to anyone else that morning. "Admiral," he replied quietly. "Please," she said, gesturing to a chair. "Sit." He did, hands clasped loosely in front of him. Jensen introduced himself formally, then stepped aside, letting Madison take the lead. "Hayden," she began, "I know this isn't easy, but we need to go over some details of your time working under Brooks." Hayden nodded. "I'll tell you anything I know." His voice was calm, but carried an undertone Madison recognized fatigue wrapped in dignity. "Start with yesterday," she said softly. "Everything you remember." Hayden took a slow breath. "I was late 12 minutes. Chloe wasn't feeling well, and the truck wouldn't start at first." He paused. "When I got there, Brooks was waiting." Madison's hands tightened slightly around her pen. "What did he say?" Hayden recited the morning's humiliation with unembellished honesty. Every insult, every accusation, every dismissal. But what struck Madison wasn't the details themselves, it was the way Hayden told them. No bitterness, no dramatization. Just the truth from a man who refused to embellish his pain. When he finished, the room was silent. Jensen cleared his throat. "Hayden, this wasn't your fault." Hayden shrugged slightly. "People have bad days." "Not like this," Madison said sharply. He looked at her, their eyes held steady, sincere, unguarded. "Hayden," she continued, her tone softening. "Brooks singled you out, not because you did anything wrong, but because you did things right. You helped others. You stepped up. You made the team stronger." Hayden looked down, as though unsure how to absorb praise. She leaned forward just a bit. "You did nothing to deserve what happened. And we're going to make that clear." Jensen added, "Your testimony confirms several patterns. You're an essential witness." Hayden nodded slowly. "If it helps others, I'll do it." Madison felt something warm bloom in her chest. He wasn't doing this for revenge, not for himself, but for the people still under Brooks' thumb. His heart was steady, unwavering. "Thank you," she said gently. "Your voice matters more than you know." Hayden met her gaze again this time, with a quiet trust that made her breath catch for just a second. When he left the room, Jensen exhaled. "You were right about him." Madison allowed a small, rare smile. "I usually am." Then Jensen tilted his head. "But this feels personal for you." Madison didn't answer immediately. She stared at the closed door where Hayden had just walked out. Her thoughts tangled with feelings she hadn't expected. Finally, she said softly, "Some people remind you of the world you're supposed to be defending." Jensen nodded. "Well then, let's defend it." Madison gathered the evidence into a single imposing stack. The chain of truth was forming, and soon it would be unbreakable. By noon, the atmosphere on the base had changed. Word traveled quietly in places like this, through half-whispered conversations. In supply rooms, cautious glances exchanged between technicians, and the tense silence that fell whenever Calvin Brooks walked by. People sensed something was coming, something big. They just didn't know it would arrive before the clock struck 1. Inside the main conference hall, a long rectangular room with stainless steel fixtures and a polished floor that still held faint scuff marks from morning drills. Chairs had been arranged in rigid rows. A projection screen flickered at the front waiting. A small podium stood off to the side, flanked by 2 flags, the American flag and the Navy's ensign. Harold Jensen stood near the front reviewing the final sequence of evidence. His calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the uneasy murmurs outside. He glanced at his watch. "She'll be here soon," he murmured to himself, and as if summoned by the steady confidence of that statement, the double doors opened. Admiral Madison Clare stepped into the room. Her white dress uniform gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Her posture was commanding every inch of her radiated precision, discipline, restored strength. Yet underneath the formality, there was a different fire, burning a moral clarity sharpened by the memory of Hayden's quiet humiliation. Jensen approached. "They're all here, Admiral. Brooks included." Madison nodded once. "Good. Let's begin." Outside the conference hall, staff members stood in small clusters. Couples of junior officers leaned against the walls, pretending to check their messages, but all eyes flicked toward the door every few seconds. Civilians lingered near water coolers, clutching their ID cards with anxious fingers. Whispers drifted like low static. "Is this about the inventory issues? I heard Internal Affairs found something big." "Think Brooks is in trouble? He's been off for weeks, bossing everyone, cutting corners." Whatever the rumors, every voice lowered instinctively as two figures approached from the far end of the corridor. Hayden Marshall walked slowly beside a young technician who escorted him. He wore clean clothes, dark jeans, and a simple gray shirt, but he looked out of place among the crisp uniforms and polished shoes. His presence didn't belong to the world of officers and rank structures, but it belonged here today. People who recognized him stiffened. Some nodded respectfully. Others looked away, guilt lingering from the part they played in silently witnessing his mistreatment. Hayden kept his gaze lowered, focusing on the conference room doors drawing near. Inside, his heart pounded, not from fear, but from something heavier. The weight of truth. The weight of memories too fresh to feel distant. When he reached the doorway, the young technician gestured. "They're ready for you." Hayden nodded. Once, then stepped inside. The room quieted instantly. Calvin Brooks was seated at the far table, flanked by two administrative officers, who looked increasingly uncomfortable. He wore an expression of practiced confidence, like someone who had mastered the art of appearing important. When he spotted Hayden, his smirk deepened. "Well, look who's back," he drawled. "Did you get lost on the way to the unemployment office?" Hayden didn't answer. He didn't break stride. He simply sat in the witness seat, prepared for him. Straight-backed, calm, a man anchored in truth. Madison stepped forward before Calvin could speak again. "Mr. Brooks," she said, her tone sharp enough to silence the entire room. "You're here because we are presenting findings from an internal investigation. You will refrain from commentary unless addressed." Calvin leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "Of course, Admiral." But even his arrogance held a tremor. Madison turned to Jensen. "Let's begin." Jensen dimmed the lights and opened the first file on the projector. The confrontation unfolded in waves. Wave 1, the reports. Jensen presented the altered documents, side-by-side comparisons, showing forged signatures, rewritten logs, and mismatched timestamps. A hush fell across the room. Calvin's jaw tightened. A thin sheen of sweat formed at his temples. To the witnesses, testimonies flashed on screen from Alvarez Patterson and the young woman from maintenance. Madison read key excerpts aloud, each word delivered with the precision of a seasoned commander. "You reassigned blame to subordinates," she stated coolly. "You altered performance evaluations. You used intimidation to silence those who questioned your actions." Calvin shifted. "None of that proves anything. They're disgruntled employees. You will speak when spoken to." Madison warned. The room held its breath. Wave 3. The footage. Jensen cued the video, grainy but clear enough. Calvin entering the chemical storage room the night of the spill. Calvin altering settings on a digital panel. Calvin leaving without securing the door. And finally, Calvin signing Patterson's name on the report the next morning. The room erupted in murmurs. Calvin lurched forward. "This is taken out of context. You can't prove enough," Madison snapped. "We're not finished." Wave 4, the truth. Madison turned toward Hayden. He felt her gaze like a steadying hand. "Mr. Marshall," she said gently, "please step forward. Hayden rose. Eyes across the room followed him, some wide with guilt, others with respect. Madison nodded. "Tell us in your own words what happened yesterday." Hayden inhaled and spoke. His voice was calm, each word placed with careful honesty. He described the morning, the late start, Chloe's fever, the truck trouble. Then the confrontation. He repeated Calvin's words not with bitterness, but with clarity. "You're a janitor, a replaceable one. Don't forget your place. Get out." The room grew so silent one could hear the hum of the overhead vents. When Hayden finished, Jensen stepped forward. "Mr. Brooks, is this an accurate representation of your conduct?" Calvin's face had lost its smirk entirely. "He's lying." Hayden didn't flinch. Madison didn't blink. Jensen opened another document. 3 separate employees reported you used nearly identical language with them in past reprimands. Calvin's facade began to crack. "This is ridiculous." Madison stepped closer. "Mr. Brooks, the evidence is overwhelming. Your behavior has violated chain of command integrity, personnel respect, regulations, and base protocols. You have manipulated documents, abused your authority, falsified reports, and dismissed staff unlawfully." Her final words were cold, precise, unshakable. "You are hereby relieved of duty pending full legal review." Calvin's eyes widened. "You can't do this." 2 military police officers stepped forward, the soft metallic click of their boots echoing through the hall. "I outrank you, Calvin," hissed desperation rising. Madison stared him down with the quiet power of someone who had walked through storms far worse. "No," she said softly. "You outranked good people. Not anymore." The officers guided him out as his protests dissolved into incoherent shouts. When the doors shut behind him, silence settled like dust. Slowly, one by one, people turned toward Hayden. Their expressions held apology, respect, and something close to admiration. But it was Madison's gaze he felt most. Strong, steady, proud. "Mr. Marshall," she said, her voice warmer now, "thank you. You helped reveal the truth." Hayden looked at her, and for the first time in years, felt dignity return to his chest, like breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "Thank you, Admiral," he said softly. Madison offered the smallest smile, a private one, a grateful one, and somewhere beneath the rigid rules of the military and the cold lights of the conference hall, a quiet bond deepened, built not on rank, not on duty, but on truth. The late afternoon air outside the administrative building felt different, lighter, almost warm despite the breeze rolling in from the coast. It carried a muted hum of new energy across the base. Word traveled fast in military communities, and though no one dared speak openly, everyone knew something had happened behind the conference hall doors. Something big. Something that felt right. Hayden Marshall walked beside Madison Clare as they stepped out of the building. The sun angled low in the sky, casting long shadows across the pavement. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The adrenaline of the confrontation still lingered, swirling around them like the remnants of a storm. Finally, Madison broke the silence. "Hayden," she said softly, "walk with me." Her tone held none of the cold authority she had displayed just an hour earlier. Instead, it carried a warmth layered with exhaustion and relief and something else. Something more cautious, more human. Hayden followed her across the quad, past rows of parked utility vehicles and training grounds, where distant shouts echoed from afternoon drills. He caught glances from a few workers, some nods, some looks of guilt, but he kept his eyes on Madison, trusting her lead. She stopped beneath a small canopy of trees beside the courtyard, the only place on this part of the base that offered shade and privacy. "Hayden," she began, turning to face him fully. "I want to speak with you before we take this to the next stage." "Next stage?" he asked, Madison folded her hands behind her back, slipping unconsciously into her old posture of command. But there was a softness in her eyes that undermined the formality. Yes, Jensen and I will be presenting everything to the commanding officers. There will be legal follow-ups, official reprimands, and procedural reviews. But your part, your testimony was pivotal. Hayden looked down, uncomfortable with praise. I just told the truth. Yes, Madison said gently. But not everyone has the courage to do that, especially when they've been mistreated. Hayden shrugged lightly. I've been through worse. The quiet honesty in his words struck something deep within her. She reached into her folder and pulled out a small memo, crisp and freshly signed. I wanted to give you this myself, she said. Hayden frowned as he accepted the paper. He skimmed the header. Recommendation for reinstatement, immediate applicant. Hayden Marshall status approved. His eyes widened. You got my job back, he whispered. Madison shook her head. No, I didn't. The words hit him like a slap, unexpected sharp. His stomach tightened. Madison took one careful step closer. I got you something better. She handed him the second page. When Hayden looked down, the breath left his lungs. Recommendation for advancement position. Civilian Technical Supervisor, recommended by Admiral Madison, Claire status. Pending final confirmation. He blinked hard, trying to make sense of the words. Supervisor, he repeated. That position oversees the entire maintenance division. Yes, Madison said softly. I'm not, he shook his head. Madison. I'm a janitor. You're a leader. Her voice didn't waver. He looked up at her. You remained calm when humiliated. You kept working when others took shortcuts. You helped people without expecting anything in return. You fixed problems before they grew. You earned respect without demanding it. She paused, letting each truth settle into the air between them. That's what a supervisor is supposed to be. Hayden swallowed hard. But I don't have the training. The credentials, you have the character, Madison said, her gaze unwavering. Skills can be learned. Integrity cannot. His breath trembled. He hadn't expected, could not have imagined anything like this when he woke up this morning. What if I fail? He whispered. You won't, she replied. There was no hesitation, no doubt. She believed it. And her belief stirred something inside him, something that had been buried under years of quiet struggle. Madison. He began, uncertain, but she raised a hand gently. You don't owe me anything, Hayden. You never will. This isn't a favor. This is justice. He looked down at the papers again, the ink crisp, the letters sharp. His name printed not at the bottom of a list, but at the top. A position he never dreamed was even remotely within his reach. You gave up your whole night, he murmured. You came to my home. You brought evidence. You fought for me. Her expression softened, an expression few had ever seen from her. You helped me first, she said quietly, when no one else did. You treated me like a person when I felt like nothing more than a mistake on a report. The wind rustled through the nearby branches. For a moment, it felt like the world had narrowed to just the two of them. Hayden, she continued, you deserve a chance to step into something bigger. He opened his mouth, but no words came. Gratitude swelled so tight it almost hurt to breathe. Just then, a small voice cut through the quiet. Daddy Chloe came sprinting across the courtyard, waving a crayon drawing in her hand, one she must have made at her after-school program. She crashed into Hayden's legs, hugging him tightly. He scooped her up effortlessly. Hey, sweetheart, he said, his voice soft with awe. Guess what? Chloe looked at him expectantly. Madison stepped forward, her smile gentle. Your dad is getting a new job. Chloe's eyes widened in amazement. Daddy. You leveled up like in the games. Hayden laughed, a sound rich with relief and disbelief. Something like that. Chloe reached out her small hand to Madison. "Did you help my daddy level up?" Madison knelt down. "We helped each other." Chloe beamed. "You're like a hero team." Hayden's cheeks warmed. Madison's heart softened. For a moment, the three of them stood together beneath the rustling branches, the quiet beginnings of something neither adult wanted to name yet, but both felt. A new job, a new chance, a new chapter. Madison rose, smoothing her uniform. "Hayden, the final approval should come by Friday. Jensen will walk you through the onboarding process. And if you need help with training modules or logistics, I'll make sure you're supported." "You've done more than enough," Hayden said, voice thick with gratitude. Madison held his gaze. "Sometimes," she said softly, "the right thing is simply overdue." Then she turned, ready to face the mountain of paperwork and meetings ahead. But before she walked away, she glanced over her shoulder at Hayden, holding his daughter, at the warmth in his eyes, at the quiet hope, budding in a life that had been so heavy for so long. Something inside her loosened. She didn't smile widely. Admirals rarely did, but the small curve of her lips held more sincerity than any formal gesture ever could. For the first time in years, the future felt bright, not just for Hayden, but for her too. In the weeks that followed, the base shifted into a new rhythm, one quieter, steadier, almost as if the air itself had changed after the fall of Calvin Brooks. The tension that once lingered in storage rooms and break areas had dissolved, replaced by something that felt like relief. Like people finally exhaled after holding their breath for too long. For Hayden Marshall, life took on a different cadence as well, one both unfamiliar and invigorating. His first days as civilian technical supervisor were overwhelming in the way new chapters often are. There were manuals to read, digital systems, to learn staff meetings, to attend, and team members to support. But as he stepped into the role, he found the transition surprisingly natural. He had been doing much of the work already, helping, guiding, solving problems quietly behind the scenes. Now, he simply had the authority to do it openly. Still, it was a lot. Hayden returned home each day with a tiredness different from the weariness of janitorial shifts. This was the fatigue that came from leadership, from carrying others' burdens and expectations. But every night, when he sat at the small kitchen table and reviewed the next day's schedule, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. And slowly, inevitably, another presence began to weave itself into this new chapter. Madison Clare. At first, her visits were strictly professional. She would stop by the maintenance building, standing beside the freshly repaired equipment, or reviewing new project proposals with Hayden. She asked questions, not because she doubted him, but because she wanted to understand. She offered guidance without overshadowing him, support without micromanagement. Then gradually the tone shifted. A knock on his office door followed by, "Hayden. Do you have a moment?" Or, "I brought lunch. Thought you might need the break." Or, "How did Chloe's science project turn out?" Each conversation softened, warmed, lengthened. What began as 5-minute briefings stretched into 30-minute discussions, and what started as professional exchanges became windows into their lives. And somewhere between the reports and the shared cups of coffee, something tender bloomed, quiet, careful, unspoken, but undeniably real. One evening, Hayden returned home later than usual. The sky had turned shades of lavender, and rose the quiet kind of sunset that felt like a whispered blessing. When he stepped into the apartment, Chloe rushed toward him with the boundless excitement only children possess. "Daddy, Daddy," she held up a small paper bag decorated with stickers. "Look what Miss Madison gave me." Hayden froze for a second, not because he was surprised Madison gave Chloe something, but because Chloe called her Miss Madison with such ease. He crouched to her level. "What's this?" "A sea turtle keychain," Chloe said proudly. She said it reminded her of me, because I'm small but brave. Hayden felt something warm twist in his chest. That was nice of her. Chloe nodded vigorously. She said turtles carry their home on their back, and she thinks I'm strong like that. Hayden closed his eyes for a moment, steadying his emotions. Madison was choosing her words carefully, not too affectionately, not too distantly, just enough to show care, without confusing the lines they were both still figuring out. Chloe grinned. "Daddy, can Miss Madison come over for dinner again? I want to show her my new coloring book." Hayden smiled softly. "Maybe soon, sweetheart." But deep inside, a quiet truth tugged at him. He wanted that too. 2 days later, that wish found its moment. Madison stopped by Hayden's office late in the afternoon. The sun filtered through the blinds, casting stripes of gold across the papers on his desk. She looked tired, professionally polished, but drained in a way only someone carrying responsibility could be. "You look exhausted," Hayden said. She gave a small, weary laugh. "I had 3 back-to-back meetings, and someone submitted a report with handwriting so bad, I'm convinced it's a coded message," he chuckled. "Want to trade jobs?" Madison raised a brow. "Only if you want to meet with 3 admirals who still argue like teenagers. Point taken." She exhaled and leaned lightly against the doorframe, her arms crossing loosely, her gaze softening. "How are you settling in?" she asked. "Good," Hayden said honestly. Overwhelmed. "But good." "I knew you'd be great at this," she said, her voice firm with conviction. Hayden felt heat rise to his cheeks. "Thank you." "Really?" A brief pause, a fragile silence filled with meaning. "Hayden," she said slowly, "are you and Chloe busy tonight?" He blinked, surprised. Not really. Why, Madison hesitated, an admiral hesitating something rare enough to mark the moment as special. "I was thinking," she cleared her throat, "if it's not inconvenient, maybe I could drop by. I could bring dinner. Something simple." The warmth in Hayden's chest grew. "We'd like that," he said, quietly. Her smile, small, genuine, edged with shyness, was enough to make the whole room feel lighter. That evening became something neither of them would forget. Madison brought lasagna store, bought but heated with care, and Chloe lit up as if it were Christmas morning. They ate at the small wooden table, talking about everything and nothing, school-old Navy stories, without the classified parts. Silly jokes Chloe made up, and memories Hayden shared sparingly, but sincerely. At one point, Chloe climbed onto the couch and announced, "Miss Madison, sit by me. I want to show you my turtle book." Madison joined her, removing her jacket, relaxing more fully into the simplicity of the moment. The sight of Chloe leaning against Madison, trusting, comfortable, did something to Hayden's chest he didn't have language for. But it was the moment later, when Chloe had fallen asleep on the couch, her head resting on Madison's lap, that sealed something quietly powerful. Hayden stood watching them, dish towel still slung over his shoulder. Madison gently brushed a strand of hair from Chloe's face, eyes' tender expression softened by something deeper than admiration. When she looked up at Hayden, their eyes held. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. There, in the quiet cocoon of his small apartment, with the faint hum of the refrigerator, the soft breathing of an 8-year-old child, and the warmth of 2 wounded adults rediscovering hope, something shifted. Not into romance yet, not into declarations, but into possibility. A place where healing had room to grow, where hearts could rest, where a man who had lost so much, and a woman who had given everything, could finally take a breath. Together, spring arrived slowly along the coast first, as the faint perfume of blooming magnolias, then as longer stretches of sunlight touching the base's concrete yards and steel structures. The winter chill had finally loosened its grip, replaced by warmer breezes that lifted spirits across the station. But spring also brought its own storms. On this particular afternoon, dark clouds gathered above the coastline, rolling in like a heavy curtain. The air thickened, carrying the electric scent of rain preparing to fall. Most people hurried indoors, securing equipment and closing hangar bays as the wind picked up. For Hayden Marshall, the sky's shift served as a quiet reminder of another storm, another night, another turning point where a soaked white uniform appeared on a lonely road and changed everything. Today felt like a full circle waiting to close. He finished up a quick system check in the maintenance building, reviewing work orders and signing off on a few newly installed parts. Supervisory tasks had grown easier over the past weeks. He'd found his rhythm, and his team trusted him. More importantly, he trusted himself. The old doubt, the quiet insecurity that had shadowed him for years had begun to lift. Just as he closed a file on his tablet, a familiar voice echoed from behind him. Supervisor Marshall Madison teased lightly. Hayden turned, smiling without hesitation. Admiral Claire. She stepped inside, raindrops clinging to her hair from the first hints of drizzle. She wasn't in full formal uniform today, just her Navy service khakis and a weatherproof jacket. Yet she still carried the presence of a woman who could steady a room by merely entering it. "We have an early storm," she said, pulling her jacket tighter. "Looks like it'll be a heavy one." "Coastal weather," Hayden replied with a shrug, unpredictable as ever. Madison studied him for a moment, something warm flickering in her eyes. "You seem more at ease these days." Hayden glanced around the building, feeling the hum of activity that had become familiar to him. "I'm getting there. I can see that." She meant it, and he felt it. Then, before either could say more, a loud rumble of thunder shook the windows. The storm had arrived with startling speed. Madison looked toward the open bay doors. We should close those before her words were drowned out by a sudden crash. A young sailor sprinted toward the building, drenched from head to toe, waving his arms frantically. Hey, sir," he shouted toward Hayden. My truck broke down, battery's dead. I'm stuck out on the East Road." Hayden stepped out from the bay, rain pelting his shoulders immediately. The sailor looked barely 20, shivering in the sudden downpour. Madison joined them, concern sharpened in her expression. "Are you injured?" "No, ma'am," the young man said quickly. "Just can't get it started, and I think the water's rising near the ditch. I tried calling roadside assistance, but signal's down." The storm worsened by the second. Hayden didn't hesitate. "I'll grab my toolkit," he said, already turning. But Madison reached out, stopping him with a hand on his arm. Her touch was firm but gentle. "Hayden." He paused. "This is a storm," she said softly. "You don't need to go out there alone." He studied her, feeling the familiar instinct inside him, the drive to help, to protect, to step into the hardships others avoided. It wasn't heroism. It was simply who he was. Still, he offered a small, grateful smile. "It's just a battery issue. I'll be all right." Madison didn't argue, but something in her eyes, something tender and resolute, made it clear she wouldn't let him face a storm without support. "Not again." She turned to the sailor. "Stay here. I'll get a poncho." Then she looked at Hayden, her voice steady. "Let's go together." He didn't protest. There was a quiet trust between them now, deep, unspoken, and growing stronger each day. The storm unleashed its full fury as they walked along the East Road. Rain fell in thick sheets, drenching them instantly. Wind pushed against them, tugging at clothes and hair. Trees swayed violently, casting shadows that danced with every lightning flash. Madison held an umbrella at first, but a powerful gust snapped it inside out, forcing her to toss it aside with an exasperated huff. Hayden laughed before he could stop himself. She shot him a playful glare. "Don't say a word." He raised his hands in surrender, though amusement gleamed in his eyes. "Wouldn't dream of it." Despite the storm, the shared moment felt light. almost joyful. Then they saw the stranded truck. Stuck near a shallow ditch, half submerged in pooling rainwater, the vehicle looked pitiful against the backdrop of churning sky. The young sailor had clearly tried to fix it himself. Tools lay scattered inside the open door. Hayden wasted no time kneeling beside the hood, pulling on his gloves. Rain streamed down his neck and over his brow, but his focus remained sharp. Madison crouched beside him, shielding the toolbox with her jacket. "What do you need?" "Hold this light," he said, handing her the small flashlight. She positioned it without question, her steady hand illuminating the mess of cables and clamps. Hayden worked, quickly testing connections, wiping away water, assessing the damage. "This kid drove through a flooded patch," he muttered. "Alternator's not happy about it." Madison nodded. "Can you fix it?" "Maybe." As he worked, she watched him, the calm concentration, the steady breath, the way he seemed almost at peace, even in the chaos of a storm. "This feels familiar," she said quietly. Hayden smirked. "Helping strangers in the rain." "Something like that." Her voice softened, meaning threading through her words. He glanced at her, rain streaking across his face. "Funny. I was thinking the same thing." Their eyes held just long enough for the world to fade into background thunder. Then Hayden reconnected. The final clamp tightened the bolt and nodded. "Try it now." Madison leaned over the truck and turned the key. The engine sputtered, coughed, then roared to life. She exhaled in relief. Hayden let out a satisfied breath. Before either could step back from the hood, another powerful crack of thunder erupted above them, followed by a sudden burst of heavier rain. Hayden turned to Madison. "Let's get back." But she didn't move right away. Instead, she looked at him. Really looked, her eyes shimmering beneath the storm's relentless downpour. Something raw and open flickered across her expression. Not a confession. Not a declaration. But acknowledgement. Everything they had weathered. Everything they had rebuilt. Everything they had begun to feel. "Hayden," she whispered. But her words were lost when Chloe's small voice echoed from behind them. "Daddy." They turned. Chloe ran toward them, tiny yellow umbrella bobbing wildly with each step, her boots splashing through puddles. One of the base daycare attendants hurried behind her, calling out apologies. Chloe reached Hayden first, breathless and soaked, but smiling through it all. "You forgot my jacket," she cried. "Miss Aaron said you'd be in the East Yard." Hayden scooped her up instantly, shielding her with his arms. "Sweetheart, you shouldn't be out in this rain." Madison approached, brushing Chloe's wet curls from her forehead. "You're a brave one," she murmured warmly. Chloe giggled, nestling into her dad's shoulder. "Daddy, did you save the truck?" Hayden smiled. "We did." Chloe looked at Madison and held up her little umbrella. "Here," she said. "We can share." Madison hesitated, overwhelmed for just a second, before leaning beneath the small circle of yellow plastic. The three of them fit awkwardly beneath it, shoulders pressed close as rain poured around them, storm raging yet held at bay by a fragile bubble of warmth and tenderness. Hayden looked at Madison. Madison looked at Hayden. And Chloe, blissfully unaware of the weight of the moment, held her umbrella proudly over them all. A family. Not by blood, not by titles, but by a chain of kindness that had circled back to where it began in the rain. As they walked together toward the lights of the base, Madison whispered soft enough that only Hayden heard. "Maybe. This time, we help each other." He squeezed her hand gently. "Yes," he said, "together." And with that, the storm that once brought them pain became the very storm that began to heal them. Before we go, we'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from tonight? And which moment in this story touched your heart the most? Your experiences, your thoughts, and your kindness mean more to this community than you can imagine. If you enjoyed this story and would like to join us for more heartfelt moments every week, feel free to subscribe to our channel. It helps us continue creating the warm, uplifting stories that bring comfort and hope to so many. Thank you truly for spending your time with us today. We appreciate you, we're grateful for you, and we look forward to sharing the next story with you soon. Until then, take care, and may peace find you wherever you are.